Hello and welcome to the Alpha Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. I'm joined today by Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success, as well as Alpha expert Dion McCormick, no relation. But today, Dion is going to be doing a presentation on APIs. But we're also here to answer your questions. So of course you can type those questions into either the chat box or the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. And when the webinar is not in session, of course, you can always send them to guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. So we're going to begin today with just a quick review of the Devcon that we did last week. And then we're going to hand it over to Dion. So how does that sound, Dion? Are you up for that?
Sounds faboo.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, sharing. Start, main screen, play. Here we go. So for those of you who attended last week, this Devcon portal should look familiar to you. Just as a reminder, you can use that username and password or your password to get in here and view the recordings. Although they will be moved over shortly to learn.alphasoftware.com, which is just an easier way of accessing them, plus any other content you may have there, including any giant killer training classes you may have there, are all available to you. We spoke a lot on this. We talked a little bit on the roadmap about some of the stuff that was coming up for Alpha, and we're going to make that roadmap available, but we're not going to go into it right away. What we did talk a fair amount about, though, was machine learning, which I thought was quite a lot of fun this year. We had Kurt Rayner, our VP of Research and Development, go through some examples of how Alpha could be used to do predictions and to get data back using machine learning technologies. As well as we had a special guest from Fuse Machines who had some examples of real-life machine learning in action. We did cover some transform stuff, of course. We went into auditing with Nikos. That was both the auditing of applications, both for performance, but also for access use as well. And we did some great customer showcases, including one with Igloo Products Corporation, the people who make the coolers. They use Alpha Transform to do quality control there. So it was a good event, and hope you were able to join us. And if not, I hope you can join us next year. So that's sort of just a quick summary of what's there. If there are any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box or the chat window. But now we're going to go back over to Dion and start today's main presentation.
You got it. Thank you very much, Dave.
All right, let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
There we go.
And there you are. Excellent.
Yeah, no, Devcon was action-packed. I imagine the Alpha team is just kind of catching up on their snoozing, and because it's a lot to put together, and phenomenal. And the roadmaps are super exciting. Can't wait. Sooner than is better in terms of getting that stuff. So very, very excited. And I want to thank everybody. I know a lot of people attended last week, and we appreciate you jumping on the webinar. Again, our key goal here is not only to introduce information, concepts, etc., but also to help you. So if you do have any questions, please jump on the GoToWebinar control panel, jump into the questions area, raise them there, both on the topic we're doing here, but also other topics. And Dave and Sarah will be monitoring that very, very closely. So as Dave mentioned, I have a quick presentation today talking about APIs. APIs obviously continue to grow as far as the dominant architectural structure of most modern systems. Not only are great companies being developed where they're really just an API that people use, things like Twilio, behind there is you're really accessing everything through an API to access their services, but also internally in a lot of companies, they've moved to an API-centric form so that it's easier and faster for them to adapt to business conditions, adapt to opportunities, and overall make it easier to maintain technology and morph it, migrate it, improve it over time in a safe and effective way. So what's neat about this is that Alpha embraced that very early on, and there's a full suite of API tools that are built into the system, not only producing APIs, but also consuming APIs. Now, we've focused a lot about producing APIs using Alpha, which is really easy to do. And in fact, we had a presentation a little while ago about how you can even develop a more modern GraphQL structured API with some built-in tools with just point and click kind of scenarios. So that is a really fun presentation. It's a month or two back, and it's very interesting technology because it's sort of the next iteration of basically how people are building applications that go forward from there. Sorry, a little sneeze there. So today, I want to do a real quick recap on and talk about how you can consume REST services. So there's multiple ways in Alpha for you to be able to do that. All of these are ready out of the box kind of solutions. They're capable. Some are already pre-built. Also, you can create your own custom implementations. And I kind of wanted to walk you through and show you the different options that are available and what the pros and cons of each of them, and how it can really produce a situation where your system becomes easier to maintain, faster to modify, and bulletproof as far as implementation from there. So I'm going to cover really quickly just a recap on using what's called curl to XBasic, and then we're going to run into something that is neater that actually allows you to build a structure of a API service or REST service, and it provides some benefits I'll talk to as I go through the demonstration there. So in order to do this, I went ahead and whipped up a simple API structure. And what I'm going to do is, where is my Postman? Where's Postman? There it is. Okay. So first, just to kind of talk about them, and I'll go ahead and let's go ahead and just put these here. I'm going to grab these and put that in the chat just so you see them, just in case you want to try and replicate it there. There, okay. What I'm using here is Postman, and I'm not sure if people are familiar with Postman, but if you're doing any kind of API work, it's something very easy. It's a nice tool, very powerful tool, and it's actually kind of becoming the industry standard for how people kind of play with, test, identify, and put things together as it. And one of the key features that is really neat about Postman is after you get an API working with all the different features such as authentication, headers, all those kind of things, it makes it easier for you to generate some sample code that you can use in different systems, much like Alpha does internally, but I'm mainly going to do it so I can show you some curl commands and stuff like that. So here are two APIs. One is a very simple API, this one right here, where it's a GET API, meaning all we're going to do is call the server and the server is going to bring data back. And again, if you go back to our previous presentations, we show you how you can essentially create these things automatically in Alpha by pointing and clicking. I mean, you can basically say, create an API by calling this database and returning data in a JSON format. Super duper easy and simple to do. So this, when you call this endpoint, it just basically gives you some user interface. There's no options or anything else. It's just really simple. So if I put in this, and you could even put this in your browser and say send, and it generates it and brings back some customer data here. There's a second API I just whipped up really quickly. It's basically, this one allows you to get the information for an individual user. So you'll notice each user has an ID and then some information that's associated with it. So I went ahead and I go, let's say I want to have an ID. I can say, give me the user for number 3, send it, and it brings back the information just for that one user here. And these are very simplistic kind of APIs, but I wanted to focus more on the process on the Alpha side and less on the complexity of the API. But do note, if you had security and other aspects that are associated with it, the Alpha sort of REST API generators and stuff can handle them with no problem at all. So let's first start talking just a little bit about a built-in capability in Alpha called curl to XBasic. So I'm not sure if you know about curl. We've talked about it in the past, but what curl is basically a C program that runs on all environments, Macs, PCs, etc. And it is essentially a command line that will allow you to call a web service, whether it's a website or an API endpoint. So you can basically just write a little curl command, and what it does is it calls that server and brings the data back, and then allows you to manipulate and use that data. It's really handy because then you don't even need to use a tool like this if you don't want. You can just use curl, and it's more of a command line environment. But Alpha has full support for curl within the solution. In fact, when you install Alpha, either on the development or the server side, it installs the curl command, so it's available in both environments for you to do really cool stuff with it. So as I mentioned with Postman, I can go over here and you'll see Postman has the ability to generate little code snippets for any kind of sort of development environment. So if you were doing stuff in PHP, it would write you the PHP code to basically call this endpoint and get this data back. If you were using something like Node.js, this is how you would do it. Let's say you were using something like Python. This is how we'd use it. And there's different variants to it, so it's available. And one thing about this Python is all of this code works great within Alpha's Python module support capability. So if you have something a little more sophisticated, it may be easy just to grab Python and implement it that way. But I'm going to go up here and you'll see one of them is called curl. And this is basically the curl command, which is the essentially the same thing as putting this in and calling and getting the data down. So I primarily just showing this because it's really nice to test stuff. Like if you want to just make sure your APIs are working good, you can put in different points here, run it right in here. You don't have to write any code, command lines, it runs, it shows you the results here, and you're able to do it from there. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my curl command here. So I'm going to copy that. And now I'm going to jump into my Alpha environment. So there we go. Okay, I'm going into Alpha here. Oops, that's not. This is Alpha here. So first, I'm going to go into XBasic and create a new XBasic script. Just to, this script could either be in an XBasic class and a function. It could be actually in UX. Anywhere you have XBasic on this white space, there are a whole series of commands, Genies, you can get by right-clicking on it. So even if you had a UX, you could right-click on it and then go to Genies and all of these capabilities. And these are really just nice little code generators. So you don't have to sit there and write a whole bunch of code. So one that I like and what I like to introduce is here is the curl command to XBasic. Basically, this allows you to take any curl command and it will turn it into a set of XBasic, including any things like security and other elements that are associated with it. So you just go into wherever you want to put this. Again, it could be an XBasic function, a class, or your UX. You just right click on the white space, go to code library, Genies, curl command XBasic, and it brings this up here. So you'll see we can basically do a couple things. So this form basically allows you to insert a curl command here and generate the XBasic. But also it's got a bunch of sort of samples that you can get here. Now again, since I'm using Postman, it's kind of written for me, but this is really handy if you're not as familiar with curl. It gives you some information there. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this here, and then I'm going to generate the XBasic, runs a little command, and then boom. Now here is my XBasic information. So I can copy this information to clipboard, and then I can paste it here. And now I have a XBasic command, and it takes care of all the things about like CA path, customer request, all these things that normally are little nits and gnats, but you don't have to worry about it. So let's go ahead and run that. And you'll see, aha, it gives me two things back. And this is the only thing that you kind of got to get your head on around in this, is that when you run this code, it actually gives you two things: the header information, because sometimes it's important to get the header information back from a call, and then the actual content, which is right here. You'll notice that is equivalent to this information right here. But you'll notice how fast I was able to write this XBasic. I didn't have to figure it all out. I just put it in. Now I can focus on, oh, okay, here is like the header information. Here's the content information. I can extract that from contents. It automatically puts the information into variables for me. And then I could take this and turn it into a pointer variable or update a database, anything I wanted to do from that. Or if this is running in UX, I could take this contents and then send it to the UX as field data or updating, say, a view box or something along those lines. But the benefit of this is that you don't have to spend a lot of time writing code. You can basically get your curl command and go from there. Now, one thing that's cool about curl is that if you look at a lot of out of the world, like let's go here, let's go Twilio API reference or documentation. And I think they have this. I haven't checked this, but let me check this, make sure. We'll go to the API reference, SMS, and there. So often what they'll do is notice in the documentation here, it gives you a curl command. So if you're trying to figure out, like for instance in Twilio, oh, I want to send this message. It actually right here in the documentation, and most people are going to standardize this because they want to make programmers to make their life easier. You'll see over here, it says curl. I just copy this curl command, go into my alpha environment, go to your white space, and then say Genie curl command X basic, paste it here. Now it may give, and then here is my COM. And this is the information how to do it. And it shows like how to set up the options, like for instance, the user password, that kind of information here. But you'll notice I didn't have to spend a lot of time. I basically went to the documentation, found a curl representation of what I wanted to do, come into alpha, paste it right here, and I'm off to races there. So the curl command X basic is super duper duper handy if you want to do it. Now, the thing about it is that, often you're just not using a single API from a system. So for instance, if you'll notice this is a single X basic that allows you to, basically this is a single curl command to do something, but there's a whole bunch of other, in their case, tons of different Twilio endpoints to do other things like call and get updates or do other things or set settings, etc. So you could go through each one of those, create a XBasic class, and then set all these things up and do that. But there's probably a better, more effective way to do this, and especially if you're using a simpler XBasic or a simpler API. And that's a neat tool I'd like to show you next. But before I just want to do a status check, see if there's any questions about this information, and make sure my audio video is coming through okay and everything's working pretty copacetic.
Audio and video are coming in just fine. There are no questions right now on API stuff, although we will have a few general questions after.
No problem. I'll continue. So there is a different way that you can actually consume or create a structure to consume REST services. So remember, my REST service in this case has two endpoints. One is get a list of users, and another one, get a single user. And let's say I want to, and maybe this could have 5, 10, 20, like update a user or delete a user or do all those kind of things there. Whatever your application is, you could have many, many endpoints that are available that you've developed. So you kind of want to wrap that into something that makes your life easier. Well, Alpha has a really cool tool that allows you to set up and build what's called a REST API service to consume data. So we've gone over the REST API provider, where you basically can take your built-in class functions here and expose them as an API. So you're taking data out of the Alpha system and exposing it, or exposing functionality to there. So we've done work on that, and that's really nice. But now the alternative is I want to now create an API service that consumes data from a third-party service. So I've already created one here, but I'm going to walk you through how to do this, and we'll walk through pulling this up and show you a demonstration of it. And the benefit of this is that instead of you having to create an XBasic class and structure all this kind of does a lot of that, call it administrivia work for you, so your life is a lot simpler. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to create a new, so I'm in the web services area over here. So not XBasic, I'm in the web services area here. And I'm going to go ahead and click new. Now I have a number of different options when this comes up. We've mainly focused on creating a new definition. That's what created this AmWorks API kind of stuff there. But also we can create a new division to create a GraphQL. That's that presentation I did like a month or two ago that talked about how you could use GraphQL to basically create a GraphQL service, which is a more modern way to provide data. But you'll see a couple of it. One, SOAP is still out there. You're going to run into it, especially with legacy environments, etc. But it's becoming less and less kind of used. REST is really where it's at. And you'll see here you have create a new definition to consume a REST service. And this will call a REST service from your XBasic code, make life easier from there. And again, one thing I want to show you real quick is that, when you do the this, it generates a lot of code here and can get confusing over time and stuff like that. You have a lot of control, but this will actually simplify your life a lot from there. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. I'm going to click here for create a new definition, and I'm going to call this webinar API. You can call it anything you want. Now I'm going to create a custom one, but here's the cool thing. There are two different ways to do this. There's actually three ways. One is you can, what I show you today, where I kind of do it custom, but there's also a new, two other ways to do it. One is called import Swagger. Now, Swagger is a industry standard sort of way to describe APIs. So the cool thing about that is that if for whatever reason you're connecting to a third party and they have a Swagger, or now it's called Open API definition, you merely have to import it and it will do all this building for you. So it's actually faster and more effective than you doing it yourself. So that's one way, and that's highly recommended. And a lot of people have moved that way because it's an industry standard. The other way is to import a Google service. So we already have a whole bunch of Google services already pre-ready to go that we've already put together. And I know that Sari has already gone through it, so I'm not going to go through all that stuff. But you know, as you can see, they have tons of services that are available: games, groups, let's see, manage identities. Who knows? Oh, you know, it's like crazy all over it. So this is a whole bunch of stuff that's already been pre-built, so you don't have to worry about it. So if you're trying to connect to Google, it's already done. We've done a lot of the lifting for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But in this case, I'm going to create a empty one because I kind of want to walk you through how this works so you understand the concept. So I'm going to click create. So that now will open up and bring open a new screen as soon as it finishes talking. So it opens up basically a command line thing that allows you to walk through and put together what your service looks like. So the first thing you're seeing is what's called a resource URL. And if we go back to Postman, where's Postman? Right here, you're going to see that if you notice between these two APIs, everything up to here is the same. So it goes blah, 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 underscore API, same thing, underscore API. And so you see those two little things right there. So this, in this case, is your service URL. It's the front end thing that you always use. And then the thing after it here, like in this case, user, or in this case, user one, is sort of the action that you can take on this service. So I'm going to take the first part of it and I'm going to copy it. Go ahead and copy that. Go in here, and in the resource URL, I'm going to paste it there. So now I have our resource URL. It says, where's that top level endpoint? And then we can then create a called actions, which are sort of the children of that, sort of like the different things you want to do from there. And we're going to do two of them. If you notice, there's two different things that are about this. One, this just calls an endpoint, but there's no parameters that go with it. You just do it. It's going to always give you whatever it gives you. But you'll notice in this one, we actually have a parameter here that we need to pass to it, which is the ID of the person. And you need to, you know, basically call that, provide the ID. So that is a variable. So we need to tell our service about that variable part. So we're going to keep it simple. We're going to start with this users here. So as I said, this is that resource URL. And now we have users, and I'm going to copy that as the action. So now if we go back in here, and we're going to go ahead, we've got our resource URL. By the way, this provider and other pieces there, if you have a lot of security and other elements, and I'm not going to go in today, but Alpha has a whole way of managing that data, so you don't have to worry about it, again, beyond the scope of today. But that's what you'd be selecting here as your providers that you've set up to be able to basically pass security data in to say, hey, you know, I need to hit this endpoint and do things from there. So I'm going to go to actions down here, and you'll notice there's two things here called schemas and actions. Schema is sort of like, it helps me understand what the data is coming back, both the data that's passed and coming back. Action is the actual action, and we'll explore that a little bit more in a few moments here. So remember, if you've got Swagger, you just have to say, import that Swagger definition, and it will automatically create all of this for you, because that's what's in that document is your definition of how it works. But nice thing is Alpha goes ahead and generates that for you as you go through the process. And in fact, after you've done it, or after you've completed it, you can export your own Swagger definition and hand it to people to make their lives easier. So it's really cool. It's almost a round trip kind of scenario. So I'll go add action. So I'm going to call this action get users, and you can call this anything you want. The path. Now the path is that last part of the URL. So in this case, users. In this case, it's going to be user one. So I'm going to go back here. Yep, right here. Sorry. I'm going to say path, the users. Now, method is important. In my case, my ones are get, but if you're posting or putting data or deleting, you may have a different method here depending on how your API is architected. So in our case, it's a get. Now, this is kind of neat here, is that we can just go ahead and test this. So I can click test and test the endpoint. And oh, I might have to do the wrong one here. I think I get this one a little confused here. And then I go in here. And let's try this, edit the action again, test. There we go. So let me explain that just so you know there. So you'll notice at the end of API here, this is without anything after it. So if you look in the full definition, after that, there is a / and the endpoint itself. So in this case, a / in users, in this case, a /. So when you're building, and this was tricky, is that when you put in the resource URL, do not put that / When you create your action, put in that /. And that's just, you saw it couldn't resolve it because it was confused. When you do this now, and it's probably set up, you can see when I run this test, it's gonna bring back the information that I need from there. Now, one thing that's also cool is when I save this, you'll notice something that it's already edited that action and it's ready to go. So really, I've got that action ready to go and we're good to go. I can export that to Swagger or continue using it from there. So I'm going to click save. And now you'll notice it created a new web service called Webinar API REST API. So now I've done my work to essentially set up and tell Alpha, how do I get access to those services? And you'll see in a few moments, how do we also provide it, variables to pass in or to pass into that from there. So now I can go back to XBasic. Actually, I'll say right here, I'll go to XBasic. Very similar to XBasic. Once I've done that kind of homework, then I can right click here, go to my Genies. Instead of curl command XBasic, I can do what's called a REST reference call. And so this, it will access my REST reference. So in my case, remember it's Webinar API, but check this out. I want to let you know, Alpha's already done a whole bunch of work on Dropbox, Spotify, Twilio, Twitter, YouTube, etc., where all of this is already pre-built. So again, if one of these systems, especially like Dropbox or something you try to connect to, don't worry about creating your own structure. It's already been done and kind of built into the system. But in my case, I have a Webinar API that I created. So you'll notice here is my service, and over here is that action, get users. And here is the code to call that. So I'm going to copy that example, click OK, and it's going to paste it right in here. So as you can tell, that's a little bit cleaner than the XBasic curl, meaning once you've done all that a lot of that behind the scenes code is kind of wrapped in something called a REST reference. And so you can see right here, is it creates an object of your REST reference, dims a result, and let's go ahead and run that. And you can see, voila. So notice, even nicer, I didn't have to get like headers and everything else. It just provides me that information back, that result that I'm looking for. So as you can see, if you were to put this in a UX or something like that, you're talking about a lot less code that's necessary to perform the same work. So again, XBasic to curl, great, use it, works great. Or curl to XBasic, phenomenal. But if you're going to do something a little more sophisticated, especially when you're starting to pass parameters and stuff, then this is the way to go. Okay, so that's really how you generate it. But let's go ahead and take it up to the next level. Let me go back into my REST reference. I'm going to edit that. And let's go ahead and now look at how do we throw in parameters. So remember, I've got the same endpoint here, i.e. the reference URL here, but I also want to pass in, and I've got this variable called really the ID of the person that's associated with it. So you hit 3, etc., etc. By the way, if you hit 4 and it doesn't exist, you get a null back. So you'll actually see, no, there's nobody by ID number 4. So now let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and grab this part right here, because remember, when I create my action, I want to grab that / and everything after it, and not worrying right now what all the pieces are. I'm just grabbing everything from the reference URL after it. So I run over here. I say I want to add a new action, and I'm going to call that user. I'm just going to call it, let's call it get user. And here is the path. Okay. Now you'll notice this number 2 is your special parameter that you're going to pass in. So you'll notice down below, you have what's called add parameters. So if I want to take this 2 from hard coded and go from there, I click add parameter. And it tells me, it's asking, is it a query or a path parameter? In this case, it's a path. Query would be like the classic question mark ID equals this. And this supports both of them. So if you have a query structure versus what's called a path, we'll do that. But I'm going to click path. And this path is called, we'll call it ID. And it's a string. And then up here, you basically put in ID. Let me see if this actually, that's what it does. Very cool. Okay, let me show you how this works right here. Actually, let me take a step back. I'm sorry, there's an easier way to do that than what I did. So I'm going to add my new action. Bear with me. I'm going to go ahead and call it get user. I'm going to paste in that that path there, and then I'm going to click these little 3 ellipsis button. And you'll notice that path here. So wait, did I do that one? Oh, I guess I'll have to do it here. Okay. Then I'm just going to go like here and put ID because I want to pass that in and click OK. No, that's not working. That one didn't. It's not query command. Let's try this. Yeah. Oh, well, I guess it is the other way. I thought it was an easier way, but I'm just create a path one, and I'm going to go ahead and edit that. And I'm going to call that ID. And then up here, you just put in the path, open parentheses, close parentheses. And now you have a path-based variable. So let's go ahead and let's edit that action. So you'll see we've got get user. Here's the path ID. We can test it. It's asking me for what my ID is there. So we'll put in 1 and oh, why is it? Let's try this here. Let's see if I did it right. Oh, there's no slash. There it is. So I need to have that slash in front of it. I'm sorry, everybody. Yeah, okay. Sorry. So basically I have my path. I put in ID there. Now when I go to test, I put in the value there. Notice that it's building that up. That looks right. So let's test the endpoint and the data comes back. So little touchy, but I think the key thing I keep screwing up is you got to make sure you have that / so that when it builds this command, you'll notice that it's building the path together. And again, if this was like, question jar ID, ID equals X, you can use both. This is called a path variable, but you could also use query vehicles there. So let's go ahead and save this. Obviously, if I just screwed it up. Yep, that's all good. Okay, now I'll go back here and now watch. Again, the payoff is after you do that work, you just go to Genies, REST reference call. I'm going to click Webinar API. So you notice I'm starting to build basically a library, a definition of that. And you'll notice that I'm going to say get user, and I'm going to copy that and put it in here. Now, you'll notice something interesting here. It's sort of similar, but you'll see that there's a command here called args ID because we're going to pass in that argument. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that, and I'm going to go args.id is equal to 3. So this is basically that little ID we put into the path. So now I can set the argument for it. It runs. And there we go. ID number 3, first name Sally Jones. I can change this ID right here, run it, and there. So the tricky part is just getting it set up. And again, if you have a Swagger definition, your life will be much easier because it defines all of the parameters and everything else associated with it, makes your life really simple. In my case, you kind of have to write it, but once you get a feel for it, once you get the hook of where those slashes are, you're good to go. But I think the most important thing is that this dramatically simplifies your code and puts a lot of the complexity behind the scenes that Alpha is writing perfect code to be able to handle it. So you don't have to worry about a lot of the nuances and stuff. Basically, it becomes very straightforward to you to be able to use this, and you're off to the races here. So that is the two methodologies. One is the XBasic or XBase to curl command XBasic. Again, works great, but generates a lot of code. Here, what you can do is you can go into your service definition. You could define all these things. You can even add a schema, which is pretty cool. And what a schema does is basically defines what exactly your result will look like, because then it understands not only how to call the service, but how the service comes back. So let's give that a try. I just want to experiment, so if you guys are okay with that. So I'm going to copy this information here. This is what comes back from it. So I'd like to have a schema on that. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to add a schema. I'm going to call that a user schema. And I'm going to go ahead and import it, put it right there. Oops, nope, that didn't catch right. Copy that. Let's go back here. Let's go ahead and go back into import. There you go. Notice what it did. It actually took your JSON or XML, and actually XML is much more difficult, so it's much nicer in this situation. It automatically figured out, oh, this is a number and this is a string. This is your schema right here. So now I've got my schema called user. I can preview it, and then you could paste some data and it would show you and save it here. So now I have not only a get user, but a schema that says what is the structure of the data that comes back. Let's go ahead and just for giggles, let's try users. Let's go ahead and see what that does just for interest here. And I haven't tried it, so I'm going to take my user repeat data. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to add a schema, and I'm going to call it users. And I'm going to import it, paste it. Oops, I didn't like that. I didn't copy it. That's the problem. Okay, copy. Come back here. Paste it. And again, it knows there. Click OK. So it just determines what the fields are in your items there. So now we have users. Save it. Let's go back here and let's generate that code again. Code library, Genie, REST reference call. Let's go ahead and go to webinar API, get user. Okay. And what's nice is that if you are using schemas, when it returns it, it'll actually put it into a structure that's easy, so it understands how to do it there. Again, you have your input arguments here, but you can also improve that. Let's see, I want to check something else. I thought I brought the schema in. Let me try this real quick. Oh, I think I might have missed a step. Just to let you know, is I think what I need to do is when I have that schema extends, now somehow I link it to there. This is kind of the limit where I went on there, so we're good to go. But the benefit is the code that you write now is much cleaner, easier, and those schemas, especially when you're submitting data to a endpoint, it can actually make sure the data is structured correctly using the schema. So you can use the schema to define your data, and then it turns it into JSON that submits to the service, and therefore you can make sure it's perfectly correct. So you don't have to write a bunch of authentic or auditing code and other things. It just works really nice from there. So, oops, wrong one. Genie, REST reference, webinar, users. There you go. So you can see I've got my different ones that are available to use. I'm also note you can also have different types of generation, recursing. If you have like recursive calls, nested, uncommented, etc. Very straightforward, easy to use there. So that is called the web service, a REST service. It allows you to consume REST services. It allows you to put a structure around that so that the code is generated cleanly and works great. Also, you can use these schemas to make sure the data that you submit to an endpoint is going to be correct. Thus, you don't have to worry about it. It kind of structures it for you. And then also, we have a bunch of out-of-the-box solutions for Dropbox, Google, Twilio, etc., Twitter, that are really nice for you to be able to use again, you don't have to import things, you don't have to create it, it's already there, it's available there. So that's just a quick overview of the API capabilities in terms of if you're calling APIs and consuming data. It is a little work up front versus just generating curl statements and generating XBasic, but you're well rewarded in terms of cleaner code, stability, easier to read, easier to manage, and over time maintain. Because if like the endpoint creates a new, like let's say you have a service and it creates a couple new services or actions, endpoints, you can just go in and modify and add those to your definition. Boom, it's all ready to go. And then your code can take advantage of those endpoints and actions from there. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and open up for any questions. I appreciate your patience as I stumble through certain parts of it. So
Yeah, that was great, actually. Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We
My
don't have a
pleasure.
ton of questions, so if you've got
Yeah.
a question, now would be a time to type one in, but we do have a
I
few.
think they got all their questions answered last week.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
Exactly.
Anyway, so this person said that they published a list control for the first time. They said it took the end user about 10 minutes.
Congratulations.
Well, it's exciting when you get the first list control up delivered to a customer. They said it took the customer about 10 minutes to complain that he had to manually refresh the data to update the list control section. What are some options that a developer might have for automatically updating a list control or making it easy for the user to update the list control without them always have to push a button?
So one of the coolest things about Alpha, again, is no code. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new, actually, let me make sure I have my data here. So just Alpha DAO. Nope, let's go ahead and create one. Okay. Okay, close. Create a new UX real quick. And I'm going through this quickly. I don't want to bore anybody. Everybody else has seen this a lot. So we can go from there. So I've created a UX. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a list control to this. So first and foremost, the nice thing about the list control is when I'm here, I can use the quick setup genie instead of walking through it. So I can just click this button here. I can say, oh, I'm using my connection string I just created. I'm looking at, say, the customer table, and here are the fields I want. Okay. And it builds the list and everything for me. So that's kind of nice there. But now once I've got that on there, again, looks nice and shows it's really simple, but now you want to refresh that list information. Okay. So bear with me. I just want to make sure a list is coming up here. Cool. So there's my list control. So what you can do, which is really nice, is I'm going to go ahead and add a button to my screen. And I'll call this refresh. Okay. I'll go ahead and put that up top. Okay. Now I'm in the action JavaScript builder. So always when you want to do something, that's the first place I always start. Now I'm putting this action right on the button, but normally I'd go over here to JavaScript action, put it there, and then call it from the button. That way you centralize all your code. But for today, we're doing it quick and dirty and simple. So I'm going to click add new action. And then it brings up the world universe of actions. And the one I'm going to type in is list. So I've immediately in the filter list area said list because I'm going to work on or act upon a list control. So you'll see down below, you have a whole bunch of cool ones like filter records, etc. But the one I want you to focus on is list control actions. And this is kind of like, if I go in here, you're going to see, oh, there are actually a ton of sub actions that are available on this list. And the number one you want to see is refresh data. Now there's a couple different refreshes. There's refresh data, there's refresh an individual row, refresh row by key. I'd stick with refresh data. Your life is simpler that way. So again, I'm creating action JavaScript, which will actually generate the code to call and force that list to be updated. So I'm just going to select refresh data. It's now asking me, well, what list? Because you could have more than one list on a UX. So I'm going to go ahead and select list number one. Now I have a ton of options here. I've got a whole bunch of options about child lists, incremental refresh. These all you can explore over time. Wouldn't worry about them out of the gate. One thing that's nice is it will check the server is available before it does it. You may or may not want to use that. So I'm going to just disable it for this and click OK. So now I've got a button called refresh. Let's call this list refresh. Okay. I go to working preview. It's going to automatically load that list, but now I can click refresh and it didn't see anything, but what happened is it's refreshing. So if any change of this data happened, it's going to refresh this data and it's going to update the information in the list for you. You'll notice once I've selected one of these things, when I click refresh, it has refreshed the data, but I set a switch saying keep that row the focus. So it doesn't, like, if I don't have that, let's see if there's let me go back in there and just do it real quick. If you'll notice, if I don't select a row and I hit refresh, it's going to go to the top. But if I select a row and then hit refresh, it maintains focus there. So your friend is Action JavaScript, the ability to do a list refresh data. Again, you notice I had keep focus on current selection, etc. So those are available if you want. And then there are also, if you want, that's kind of the quick and dirty. In fact, I can sit there and view the JavaScript. You can see it's got a fair amount here, but you can also, if you want, and this is again more advanced, but if you're going to, you also have a whole bunch of methods that are built into Alpha for refreshing the list. So if you're doing things more on you can see, let's go list refresh. Okay. So you can see, where is it? List, refresh. There it is, refresh list object data. So, basically Alpha, when you do the action JavaScript, generates this for you, but it's a simple command you could put anywhere saying refresh list data, give it the name of that list, and it will work. So a couple different ways to handle it from there. And so really just add those. And again, what's nice too is that if you make it a JavaScript action and you put it there, then you can call it from a button, you can call it after something else happens. You can even remotely call it. There's ways to do that from there. So I hope that gives you some pointers on how to add, say, a refresh to it. Now, one other thing I like to show people just real quick is let's go ahead and show you how this will refresh automatically on a periodic basis. I get that question all the time. It'll only take a minute to show. Is that okay, Dave, if I go through that?
Oh yeah, definitely go through that, because that was the question. They said their user was tired of actually hitting that button. They want it to happen on.
Then we're going to show it right here. Okay,
exactly. Yep.
So remember, I told you what you really want to do is never really kind of build the action JavaScript on a button. You can, never say never. But I always go here whenever I want to create a JavaScript command. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say refresh list. Same thing we did before. Going to create that action JavaScript. Find the list command here. There you go. The action is refresh data. And I want list one there. Okay. So same thing I did here. Now, once I've done that, I now can call this from buttons, from etc. I can even call it from JavaScript, which is pretty cool. So you'll see it says refresh. You'll see there's a little line down here called click to see the JavaScript code to invoke this action. So if I open that up, if you put this little piece of JavaScript anywhere you want, on a button, everywhere else, what it will do is it will execute that JavaScript action. And the cool thing about it is that this JavaScript action, I could be refreshing the list, but also refreshing other things or doing something else. So it's really a nice way to kind of encapsulate all your code into a single place. So again, what I did is I created that refresh list. I click here to see the code, and I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. So now I have that JavaScript command to do that. Now, let's save it. Okay. So now I'm going to go to properties, and I'm going to look for, this is the UX properties. So this tab right here talks about the UX that the list lives within. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go timer. And there is a cool thing here called has on timer event. So again, I went to properties on your UX, clicked here on the and search for it and looked for has on timer. Okay. And there's the on timer event. I'm going to turn it on. Okay. So what this does is that this is a built into the UX. Basically, when I turn it on and I give it an interval, and I'm going to make it a little shorter. This is in seconds. So every 20 seconds, it's going to call what's called the on timer event. So this handles the triggering of that event. You'll notice that I don't actually put the code that I want to run. And again, this is JavaScript, because remember, when you publish this to the web, to the person's browser, the server kind of is off the table. So there are ways to call from the server and do refreshes. But in this case, the web page is sitting on the person's desktop, their laptop, their phone. And what we want to do is trigger some JavaScript every 20 seconds. So step number one is go properties, find the property on timer, turn it on, and then put in the event amount. So 20 seconds, that could be 120 for 2 minutes, etc. from there. Now that you've done that, you need to go to the, is it client-side events? Yes, client-side events. And this can get a little confusing, but don't worry about it. You can see there's tons of these events. Basically, these are all ways of trapping when something happens. Like if the UX is refreshed or gets submitted or after it's initialized. Again, don't worry about it. So remember, in our primary or our properties, it said on timer. Just go to client side and go here to filter and type on timer. And you'll see there is a on timer client side event. And you can see it's just there. So I go here and I'm going to paste in that action JavaScript code. So what's going to happen is the UX, now that it has a timer enabled, every 20 seconds, it's going to say, oh, I've got to do something. Whatever code is in this little on timer area here, do it. And this could be, and that's why I say don't write all the code here, put them in JavaScript actions. And this looks really, really simple. So now let's go ahead and go into working preview. And now that we have this enabled, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, but I'm not going to select anything. And let's wait. I should have made that 10 seconds. So I'm going to keep talking here. But in 20 seconds, you should see essentially the equivalent of me clicking this refresh button and that screen or that list being refreshed. And when the list gets refreshed, it talks to the server. It pulls any data that's been updated.
Oh, there it did.
You have it there. There it goes from there. And it obeys everything else. So if I go down here and click something, it's going to stay on that because it's using the same action JavaScript we did before. It's just being triggered by the UX on a periodic basis from there. So that's a quick and easy way to do it. Create your JavaScript action. Go ahead and go to the properties. Enable the on timer event terminal. The on timer event and the amount of time you want it refreshed. Go to the client side events. Go to on timer, paste it here, and you're done. And again, you don't have to worry about it. Every 20 seconds, whatever's in this page right in here will run, whether it's on a phone, on a mobile device, on a laptop, on someone's desktop UX, wherever, or a web browser. Cool stuff.
Hey, thanks very much. Follow-up question to that. Can you add that same code, that refresh code, to your save record event or button? In other words, when I save a record in the list, can I have it automatically refresh that list?
Yes, it can. But there's actually an even easier way to do this. So this was like a standard list. I'm going to add a detail view. Okay. And then my detail view here, I'm going to go ahead and have it do a quick setup, Gene, create all the controls and add the buttons.
Great. And
after here, it's just going to generate. I could have already generated these pieces here. Okay. So you can see here's my list, but now here's my what's called a detail view. This is where I can edit the data. And you'll notice there's a button here called save. And this is the JavaScript code you would run to save any changes here. So technically you just take this information right here and put that into the on client event. And if there are any dirty rows, it will go ahead and save that and do that for you. So this is how you do there. You can use that built-in save button. You know, it's basically pre-written the code. You just copy this information here. And then you go to your client-side event, and then I could paste it in right here. And then every 20 seconds, it's going to say, are there any edits in your detail view? Go ahead and save those. And then as if the user had clicked the save button there. One other thing I want to show you too is that there with lists, because they're offline animals, you have both a save function, which saves it to the local data on the client, wherever that happens to be, but then there's a synchronize event. So what you can do is actually, you'll notice if I click save, I've also got to click synchronize. Well, if you go into your list, go to the detail view and go to the synchronization policy, you can actually enable it saying when someone saves something to the list, go ahead and perform the synchronization right away. Now, if it fails, it will wait and retry and synchronize it later on the next time someone tries to save something or you trigger it. But this allows you to get rid of that two-step where you say save and then sync. If you just click highlight and enable these, then when you save it, it's going to automatically perform the synchronization for you. Make simple. There are other commands you could add. You know, there's JavaScript commands to take fine-tune control over this, but this is the quickest. And I almost always enable this because I want whatever change out in the field, try to immediately get it back to the server so I'm in sync and everything's good to go from
And
there.
it doesn't just synchronize data, but also refreshes the display at the same time. So
correct. You are
yep.
correct. So
Great.
it handles all that stuff for you. Cool.
Excellent.
Great question.
Okay, so last question is, I know we have a lot of time, but how do you handle things like setting request headers and things like that when you were doing your APIs?
Yes.
Like
okay. So
that looked
when
like
you're
that
doing
was an
your
option in the builder. It looked like there was a spot for that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back here. Yeah, we'll say that. Go to dun, 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 dun. Okay. So when you are editing this is just the use, but you have in provider, this is where you can define things like OAuth providers and API providers.
Mm-hmm.
And then also in here, similar from there. As far as adding a header to this URL call, I have to check on that. I honestly don't know.
When you had the schemas where you were allowed to pass in variables.
Let's see,
The person I'm
extend.
looking at.
Yeah, this is more just the structure of the data.
Yeah, for example,
really
you were saying
name.
API call 2 or API call 3. If you remember that part of your presentation, there was a place where you said, oh, I could put it in the query string, or I could put it in as a URL variable.
Yeah, that was in the, let me go get user. Let's edit that action here. Oh yeah, like let's say I do post.
And then when you add a parameter, it looked like, at least at the bottom, you clicked add parameter.
Have to talk about, it's not method access. I'd have to check on that.
Here,
It's a really good
click
question.
that parameter at the bottom if you don't mind. Sorry.
Oh, sure. This one?
Yeah. Yep. Header.
Yeah, you can. Oh, okay, here you can put it in the header. So you could put these
So you can pass in value pairs in the header that way.
Yeah, so it passes it as a header body. You're right. Correct.
Cool.
So it could either be a query string.
We figured it out. Good.
I know. Eventually, where it is on there. Cool. No, thank you. Big
Excellent.
help.
Oh, we are right out of time, and I think we're a question or two short. So please send in questions that we didn't get to guides, UIDES@alphasoftware.com, and we'll be happy to get back to you. Dion, thank you very much for presenting. Thanks very much for minding the fort and answering questions in the background. Again, you know how to reach us at Guides. We hope to see you at our next Wednesday webinar. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.